Good afternoon, Artificial Hearts family. We're here for another episode of Artificial Hearts. We have a special guest with us directly from Baruch College, Dr. Professor Mimi Okabe. Welcome, Professor Okabe.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor to be here.
Oh, that's great. Is it okay if we call you Mimi, or do you prefer Professor Okabe?
Mimi is fine.
Mimi is fine. Oh, that's
Yeah,
great. Well, Mimi, how we usually start the podcast, we give the our guest an opportunity to introduce themselves, and we were
sure.
wondering if you could do that to for us. Could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and where you're coming from?
Yeah, sure. My name is Mimi Okabe, and I'm currently, as you mentioned, an assistant professor at Baruch College, which is part of the City University of New York. I specialize in Japanese cultural studies with a focus on manga, detective fiction, and I explore questions of like identity and representation, particularly in post-1990s Japan. I'm also the author of Manga, Murder, and Mystery, which was published in 2023 by Bloomsbury and won the International Crime Fiction Association Book Prize. Up until about 2024, I also co-founded an educational initiative called Japanese for Nikkei, which I later sold to focus on my academic work full time. And really, my goal, both in and outside of the classroom, I guess, is to just show how Japanese pop culture can be a really powerful side of critical inquiry and self-reflection, and it's not just like entertainment.
Oh, wow, awesome. Sorry, you said you sold a business that you had?
Yes.
Oh,
Well,
great.
I was a co-founder of it. The other co-founder bought it up.
What kind of
So
business,
we are friends.
if you don't, what kind of business, if you don't mind me asking?
It was a learning platform for the Japanese diaspora. So it was called Japanese for Nikkei. Nikkei refers to, Japanese Canadians,
Oh,
Japanese American, those of Japanese descent.
oh,
And we
wow.
basically taught specialized language courses for heritage language learners.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I definitely want to hear more about that. But before we dive into kind of our conversation, um I think Professor Shinji, I think your colleague, he introduced us. And I want to thank you again for being here on the platform. And I think we also want to maybe learn a little
Mm.
bit more about yourself, your passion for manga and Japanese culture. And I saw in your bio that you're a descendant of Japanese immigrants. How was that experience of living kind of between two cultures, and how did that kind of shape your outlook on life and the work that you do?
Yeah, so thank you so much. So I really do appreciate the question, and I kind of want to approach it thoughtfully. So I was born in Japan. I was born in Miyagi Prefecture in Japan, and I immigrated at 11 months to Canada. So I'm not really like a direct descendant of Japanese immigrants living in Canada, but I'd say that, my positionality as a Japanese Canadian has fundamentally shaped how I think about like teaching and research. So, as a Japanese Canadian scholar, I think I found it especially meaningful to engage with Nikkei or the Japanese diasporic identity in my work, whether through creating curricula tailored to the learning needs of like other Japanese Canadians or other Japanese Americans, or even through like close readings of manga that interrogate ideas of like nationhood, youth, and issues of belonging. So I guess see it as part of my mission to, I don't know, inspire other JCs or JAs to study manga and Japanese pop culture as, valid and culturally important objects of academic study or inquiry, and that we don't have to shy away from or apologize for loving manga or anime and reading them critically.
Wow, that's fascinating. I definitely want to approach that. And thank you for correcting me that I didn't
No,
know
no, it's
that. I must
okay.
have misread something. But in light of that, what are some of the things that you think have kind of impacted you from both cultures and kind of shaped this passion and love for manga and for anime that you have?
So, just to clarify, is this relating to the third question or is it just like a follow-up to the second
Follow
question?
up to the second question. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it would be lovely in manga studies to explore like diasporic narratives. I think that's kind of a field of study that is emerging still. It would be really interesting and really neat to see if in future work, I think like Japanese Canadians and Japanese Americans kind of dabbling in the world of manga as well as anime, which we haven't really seen. So like stories about us told by people like us or pe told by a group of people whom we can better identify with.
Right. Wow, that's cool. And kind of before the next question, I was also curious, how is the Nikkei community in Canada? I'm asking
It's
because I'm
it's
from
quite
Brazil.
large, right?
It is?
I mean,
Oh.
yes, there's a huge history of Japanese Canadian internment
Oh, really?
in
Oh,
Canada.
I didn't know that.
Yes,
Wow.
yeah, yeah, similar to the United States. Um, and so if you're really interested, I can send you some links later on.
Oh, yeah, sure.
There, um,
Yeah, you can send me
there
the
are a
link.
lot of societies and organizations, like Japanese Canadian ones, that are invested in preserving the Japanese Canadian history, and they also are the ones that are running various cultural events, and really involved in like political demonstrations and things like that. So yes, I'm sorry that, uh, the names of those organizations are kind of slipping through my mind right now.
Oh no, that's fine. No, I was asking you, yeah, that's really interesting because and this is a little bit side topic, but like
Mhm.
in my PhD, I'm doing on religious freedom in Brazil. There
Oh,
was also
okay.
like yeah, and there was like it's actually a very fascinating case of like a Japanese Brazilian. Well, I should say it was Japanese, kind of like emigrated to Brazil and then was interned because of his beliefs on nonviolence and pacifism. That was kind of an
Mhm.
interesting thing, kind of comparing that with the whole experience of like the Japanese diaspora in the US and I guess now Canada.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a really large diasporic Japanese diasporic community in Brazil as well, and I learned in the Philippines as well.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Well, that's
there are
fascinating.
there's communities all over the world. But the business that I was talking about, we had Nikkei or people who had Japanese, descent or ancestry, um, join us from Australia, Sweden, Japan, United States, Canada, England, like just all over the world.
Wow. Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, and I guess kind of in light of that, how did Japanese culture shape you living in Canada, and how was the transition um for you becoming kind of a scholar of manga? How did that develop?
Yeah. So maybe I'll just focus a little bit on the second part of the question, if
Yeah,
that's okay. Because,
yeah, for sure.
yeah,
'Cause we
I
talked
kind
about
of
it.
have it in my notes already.
Yeah.
That's
No,
um.
sorry, just because
So
I try to flow a little bit more with the questions.
yeah, yeah. No, this is great. This is great. But I think perhaps like many people in my generation, right, that grew up with anime and manga. So titles like, I don't know, Detective Conan, as you might know, is one of my favorites, Sailor Moon and Pokemon, really
Oh,
shaped my early fascination with storytelling. Back then, anime and manga was like, were like kind of a cool thing, right? But before that, like I was always teased for being like Japanese or Japanese Canadian. But like once the whole like Japanese boom, if you will,
oh,
thanks to Japan's soft power movement, the
oh,
import of pop culture, Japanese pop culture, it was like all of a sudden cool to be Japanese and
oh, when was that? That's
like the 1990s.
Oh, that was the 90s. Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Okay, that
before
makes sense.
that,
It
yeah,
wasn't
like
like that before?
no, well, I mean, when I was growing up, definitely not. But for my sister, my younger sister, my younger brother's generation, it was like, yeah. to eat Japanese food and to do Japanese things was like considered cool. But in my days, it wasn't. But anyway, so I was really, I guess, interested in looking at things like Sailor Moon and Pokemon and Detective Conan when they came to Canada. But as I kind of grew older, I began to see manga and anime not just as entertainment, but as like a complex cultural archive to some extent, right? Something that reflects and critiques social norms, anxieties, and or desires. And my formal engagement with manga really came through my graduate studies. So when I began researching detective fiction and its adaptations in Japanese media, and I was really drawn to how manga kind of reconfigures like classic tropes and characters, often through a kind of Japanese lens that speaks to like local histories. So things like the economic collapse of the 1990s in Japan,
Really?
or the reconfiguration of youth identity in the post-bubble era, which are topics I kind of address in my book, Manga Murder and Mystery.
Wow. Could you give maybe some examples of that, of those like tropes, like the that connection with like the historical trope and maybe some anime that people are familiar with?
Yeah, so I can talk about it in terms of like my field, like detective,
Yes,
if
let's go
that's
into
okay.
that. Yeah, yeah,
So
for sure. Please.
so in my book, I kind of look at three archetypes. I look at uh the kind of ochikobore detective, the good detective, and like the criminal detective, right? And they're all kind of a response to the ways in which youth were represented in Japanese media, I think, in the 1990s.
Okay.
So in the 1990s, there was something called the Lost Decade, right? And the Lost Decade really refers to a period of economic stagnation, social instability, and kind of rising anxiety about youth. Um, there was one case that really shook the nation. It was called shōnen A incident in 1997. And this is when a 14-year-old boy brutally murdered a classmate, beheaded him basically, and left his head at the gates of another school. And
Oh, wow.
it led to widespread moral panic. And at the time, like psychologists, sorry, media commentators, and even like the education system started questioning like the morality of Japanese youth. And there was this collective fear that children were becoming like unpredictable, even dangerous or monstrous, right?
Oh, wow.
And I think it was in this climate that the boy detective kind of responded. So we started to see the reemergence of the boy detective as a kind of like uh, moral counterpoint, if you will, instead of like a criminal, right? Um, so we don't have boys committing crimes, we have boys solving
Solving
crimes
crime.
and
Okay.
restoring order. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Oh,
reminding us that like youth can still be good. And the three archetypes that I talk about, or the tropes that I talk about, kind of manifest um, that in different ways. And so the first two archetypes are kind of like idealized figures, right? So we have these really wide-eyed, kind of innocent yet brilliant, rational yet emotionally maybe resilient characters. Um, and they become like the centers or like the vessels for both hope and critique of society. But something interesting really happens when we move into like the 2000s. So the boy detective figure begins to shift kind of, and he's no longer just this goody two-shoe detective, restoring like moral order.
oh.
Instead, we see characters like Light
Oh,
and
wait.
or
I
Light
was
Yagami
thinking of
and
that
Death
right
Note.
now. I was gonna
Yeah,
ask you
yeah,
about that. Yeah. Please, please.
yeah. So, he is brilliant and charismatic, but takes justice into his own hands.
Yeah.
in morally questionable ways. Or the other manga that I talk about in my book is Moriarty the Patriot, where Moriarty isn't the villain, right? The Moriarty is the villain in the Sherlock Holmes stories, but in the manga, he's like a vigilante anti-hero who kind of exposes the flaws of a really rigid British class system. Um, and in that manga, Holmes becomes more of a like a foil than like a savior. So, um,
Got it.
yeah, what began as a, I guess, as a project about boy detectives became like a study of how Japan reimagined youth and questions of morality and authority uh, during the 1990s, going into the 2000s.
Wow. Oh, wow, that's fascinating. Okay, can we backtrack? Because I have so many questions. I just find that really insightful. What you were
Yeah.
saying. Well, first I wanna go back to that whole case of the heinous crime.
Mhm.
Just was there any motivation that they found for the young man doing that, like that crime? The
Yeah. So, um, there were reports that the crime was initiated, due to like a sexual nature, but really at the heart of that crime was the issue of bullying. So
okay.
the perpetrator, the killer, the child killer, in this particular case, wrote a note. And in that note, he claimed that he was forced to live 透明な存在, an invisible existence at
Oh,
school. And so it was a wider comment on bullying and, mm, kind of the things that I guess, school kids kind of deal with that wasn't dealt with properly. And what was really disturbing about this case was that Shonen A or Boy A, because he was a young offender, they couldn't reveal his name. Um, he came from what you would call a middle class, normal middle class average home, right?
right.
Um,
Yeah.
came from a stable family, right? Came from a place where he wasn't, struggling financially. So very much like Light Yagami and Death Note, if you will.
Right. Okay. Wow, that's okay, cool. So, okay, and then the second question. Okay, so what you're saying is the initial depiction is kind of to promote an image of the boy detective as a hero, not this kid who gets in trouble or not this kind of troublemaker. And then my question on that, who was kind of promoting that idea of using the boy detective to kind of preserve civil order? Was that like the government, or was that just like the artists naturally wanting to convey that image because they felt like it was necessary? Who was kind of pulling the strings to create to incentivize the creation of that depiction?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. Partially, so I'll answer. um, Yes, definitely the creators, like the mangaka, have they're the ones creating the stories. There are two manga, in particular that kind of revived the detective or the classic detectives, and their writers in the 1990s. And the two were Kindaichi Shōnen no Jikenbo, the case files of Kindaichi, and Detective Conan, right, in which we see the very famous character Edogawa Conan. Um, yeah, certainly, the mangaka, I think, could be commenting on how, sometimes manga is interpreted as a medium that is all entertainment and doesn't really teach good values. But, through these stories where these children are solving crimes and detecting crime, it shows us that, uh, young boys or youth can do good in the world. It teaches us perhaps to think rationally, right? To be aware of our surroundings, to be like a detective, like Sherlock Holmes, if you will.
Right.
Um, And because they are so promising and because they are so morally centered and heroic in that regard, there are Japanese, like the Tokyo Metropolitan Police uh, Department
Right.
have used Edogawa Conan, who is the protagonist of Detective Conan, to promote things such as like road safety. So you'll
Really?
see like a huge mascot of Conan, right?
Wow.
Promoting road
That's
safety and
cool.
teaching children how to be safe on the streets.
So do you think I guess like do you feel like it's not taken as seriously as it should be like in the States manga?
I think people, so like when I see my students talking about it and reading it, they're really moved and compelled by uh, the stories, the characters that they can relate to, right?
Right.
And so if that is true, then I don't think it's true of fans or avid readers of manga, but those who are kind of like, what is this manga thing? Like outside of the readership or fandom.
Right. So you think okay, right. So you think like there is I mean and I agree with this too. At least I think I mean speaking as an outsider, I think that there it does. I mean, let's say Death Note. I don't know if that was one of the books that you dealt with in your work, but it feels almost like there's so much existential depth in that kind of story. Like it feels like kind of like Dostoevsky and like a comic kind of thing. Like it deals with these like very existential themes. Like what would it be like if you had these divine human like powers? Like what is justice, right? And yeah, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so Light Yagami is kind of really controversial, right? And he has so
Yeah.
many similarities to real life boy criminals like Boy A. Again, comes from
Luigi
uh,
Mangione.
what's that?
I don't know if you followed the case of like Luigi Mangione on in the
Oh,
media.
yes, 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 yes. Like,
Yeah, it
is he
feels
a
like yeah.
hero or is he? I can't comment on that. Sorry,
No, me neither.
but
Me, yeah, me neither. But like, but exactly, you know what I mean? Like it raises that question of like, what is justice, right?
yes, yes. And like I said, the manga going into like that came after detective manga that I think that came after Death Note really focused on the fuzzy boundaries of justice and crime, right? What is true justice in a world where the aristocratic or the wealthy are able to live free with intent, right, and integrity and safety, while the people at the bottom of the hierarchy are struggling, right?
Right. Wow. What is something that you would like your readers to take away from your book, Manga, Murder, and Mystery?
Oh, if anything, so I think I mentioned this in my introduction as well, is that I hope there is no like scholarly book except for Manga Murder Mystery on detective manga. So it's the first one.
Really? Wow.
There are a few books that explore Japanese detective fiction, and I cite them all in my book. There are about four or five, but this is the first one that explores detective tropes, history, conventions in manga. And
Detective.
so,
Specifically
like,
detective.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yep.
So,
And there it's specifically sort of adaptation. I start by looking at adaptations of uh, like classic Japanese detectives and their writers, as well as um, Japanese adaptations of Sherlock Holmes. And so if there's one thing that I want readers to take away from my book is that I hope they use it as like a springboard to expand and build a field. Like I don't want them to read it and be like, I want them to and accept everything I say. I want them to kind of be critical with it. If you agree, like explore your own line of research, right? Build off of my research, and create a kind of discourse. And I want to define and build the field of detective manga.
oh, okay. So just to confirm, so this is the first work ever written on detective manga in the
Yeah,
Academy.
yeah,
Oh wow, congrats. That's really
yeah.
cool. It's not the
Took a
first,
long time.
it's not the first, but there are like scholars. Oh, you said it took a long time?
Yes.
And I feel you. I'm like writing my dissertation right now. It's so painful. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
so
so
basically
grueling.
I took my dissertation and I turned it into a book, but I had to rewrite the introduction and I had to rewrite certain parts of the dissertation so that it was like quote unquote bookable.
Right, yeah, of
But
course. Yeah.
there are scholarly articles, which I think I cited all that was available at the time when I was writing the book and reworking the dissertation. So there are scholarly articles that explore mystery fiction and adaptations of Sherlock Holmes in Japanese media, but there's no real book on it. So,
On manga even, as in art
oh no,
form.
no, 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 no. There are many books on manga, but
Okay.
yes, not on detective manga.
Detective manga.
Because
Got
it's a
it.
little bit niche.
Niche. Okay. But going kind of like now kind of going to manga more broadly.
Mhm.
How is that field in the academy? Like it has there been a lot that's been written on that on like that art form, or is it something that's still kind of more like within the realm of like pop culture? How do you see it as
Yes.
a scholar?
So, you know, if we were talking about like the development of manga, it's really important to um maybe begin by saying that manga's development is like far more recent and industrially grounded than many popular histories would suggest. So, there might be this tendency, especially with those outside of the circle of like manga studies and fan discourse, to link manga's origins to like pre-modern narrative scrolls like emaki. But, these links are really evocative, um, certainly, but they kind of risk implying that, manga is like on this continuous and ancient and quote unquote uniquely Japanese art form, if you will. But when manga, as we know it, today is actually influenced by like a transcultural ebb and flow of stories, conventions, and genres. So, um, if you're interested in looking at the history of manga, it might be really important to draw on the works of manga historians like Eike Exner, who argues persuasively that manga as a format and cultural industry should be understood as part of like the broader global history of like comics. So his book, I think it's like Comics and the Origins of Manga, and he came up with a new one. I think it's called Manga, A New History of Japanese Comics. These two books, I think, show that early Japanese comics were kind of influenced by, translated Western comics and vice versa, um, and that manga itself really came to designate the format we recognize today in the 20th century. Um,
Wow.
Other books, yeah, I think other books that are really useful for maybe our listeners if there's
Yeah,
interested in looking at
for sure.
manga history or manga as a critical kind of uh, manga through a critical lens. So Jacqueline Byrne, she's kind of like the leading scholar in manga studies, wrote many, many books, particularly the Cambridge Companion to Manga and Anime. And then there's also a book called Manga and the Representation of Japanese History by Roman Rosenbaum, if I pronounced it correctly. And these mangas are great because they kind of discuss the rise of shōnen and shoujo demographics, the increasing conversions between manga, television, and toys, which all kind of played significant roles in shaping what we kind of understand and think of manga today and the manga industry as well.
Cool. And like, do you think, I guess like one question I've been kind of fascinated is how manga has like met or the art form has kind of managed to take over the market. It was that
Mhm.
is that something that resulted from the Japanese soft power that you were talking about in the 90s? Or is it just you think more of an organic thing, like people just like it and and love drawing it in that style.
Yeah, I think Akira had a major impact in
Really?
the distribution of manga in the United States. But I think in general, like in terms of market dominance, manga has really succeeded globally in part because of its like versatility, if you will, right? It spans almost every genre from romance to like slice of life to like political thriller, speculative fiction, of course, detective fiction. And it offers like serialized storytelling that encourages like long-term fan engagement, and it's increasingly being adapted into anime, games, sometimes featured films and merchandise, right? Making it part of a really powerful media mix or transmedia ecosystem.
And what are your like expectations for the future of manga? I mean,
Um,
I know you're not a, like a prophet, but like in general, like from seeing like
I
the
think
tendencies.
yeah, I so when I came to New York, I'm going to just provide some context to answer this question. When I came to New York, I was really shocked that they had a Kinokuniya, which is a big bookstore that Japanese bookstore that sells manga. And I just we didn't have that in Canada or in Toronto, for instance, right? But
Mhm.
I think, it's just going to spread and it's just going to become much more accessible to readers from all over the world. So I'm very hopeful for the potential of manga and reaching a much wider demographic, and through that people all around the world can learn about Japanese culture, Japanese history. Uh, it might even allow for greater exchange of ideas, right? Because if more people are reading it, it might inspire more people to critically study it. So I'm very hopeful and optimistic about the
Oh,
future of manga.
well, that's awesome, and we want to wish you the best of luck as you kind of continue to educate uh the public about this art
Mm.
form, about Japanese culture. And as we kind of start to wind down in the final block of our program, I think like our list, our the people, our followers are probably going to be curious to know. I know
Mm.
you mentioned some in your book, obviously, detective manga, but what are some anime or manga that you've enjoyed reading that you haven't mentioned yet? What are some of the newer manga or anime that you look forward to watching?
Yeah, so I read a lot and watch a lot. So I read a lot of manga and I watch a lot of anime, partly for research and partly because, I genuinely love the medium. But over the past few years, I really, of course, enjoyed Detective Conan, um, as well as The Detective is Already Dead, Millionaire Detective, Rampo Kitan, uh, Trickster, and recently when I went to Japan, I kind of binge watched Summertime Rendering, which isn't really detective, it's more mystery. But basically, these works play with the detective form in ways that range from like cerebral, if you will, to the surreal. And they're excellent, I think, case studies in how the genre adapts to new audiences. I've also been rereading Nana, which is, I believe, celebrating its 25th anniversary this year.
Oh, awesome.
Yes, yes. But on a more personal note, like I also enjoy anime that feature like a strong girl protagonist.
Oh,
So I can relate to like the one in I don't remember the title in its entirety because it's like this really long title, but uh, it's like I may be a guild receptionist. I think that's just the first part of
of the
the
title.
title.
Um,
Yeah, but basically in this, like the main character, her work ethic, or rather her ambition to work as little as possible, like she hates working overtime, and so she basically uh, destroys or gets rid of like really tough enemies in this fantasy game-like world. But this ambition is like hilarious, like really, really relatable.
hmm.
Mm. I also finally like Demon Slayer, especially like Zenitsu.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
yeah.
Did you like Mikasa, like that kind of female character?
Oh, Mikasa. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I have my own personal opinions about the ways in which, Attack on Titan ended.
You want to share
But
them?
yeah, I think the first few volumes, Mikasa's depicted as really, I mean, she remains, resilient and strong, but um, there was a little bit more humor and innocence, obviously, in the first few volumes.
Yeah, and then she becomes like super strong. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. I think yeah. Anyway, cool. We saw recently, I think something that is really changing art is AI, and it's been changing. I would assume, and you can correct me, please. It's changing in significant ways the anime industry. Thinking of like the Ghibli filter in the last a couple of weeks. In your opinion,
Mm,
as a scholar of anime, or somebody who's just a fan and appreciates art, how do you think AI will change how the reader, how we experience this art form, and what do you think we gain or we lose with this new kind
um,
of technology?
yeah, this is a really vital question nowadays, right? Because AI is so prominent in everything um, and everywhere. So I think, AI is already impacting animation pipelines in Japan, helping to cut costs in some cases, like replacing background artists. So tools like Lina's Manga AI or the Stable Diffusion trained models are also enabling users to generate images in the style of manga or anime with like little to no drawing experience, which might be useful for people like me,
Oh yeah.
that want to tell stories but don't have the skills to do so. I'm just kidding. But publishers like Kadokawa have actively explored the integration of AI into manga production workflows. So they've run like beta programs using AI to assist, sorry, with like background rendering, screen tone placement, and even like suggesting panel layouts. So, rather than replacing artists, I think these tools are kind of marketed as like productivity enhancers, right? So it's possible or potential um, benefit is that it reduces burnout and helps accelerate the production cycles for like serialized works. So there are advantages of that, right? In terms of like accessibility and creative experimentations. But as you mentioned, like there are also risks, especially around labor and authorship and cultural commodification. So, for example, and the listeners and you don't have to necessarily agree, but perhaps on the one hand, one could argue that AI generated content often erases like the human touch, right? The imperfections that make manga emotionally resonant or something. And it also raises ethical questions of like who basically owns AI generated manga that mimics like the style of Ghibli or Clamp or whoever your favorite artist or mangaka might be, right? With that said, though, I think it's really, really important to point out that while AI generated manga and or anime, to the best of my knowledge, and I might be wrong, I don't think they've taken home any one of Japan's major industry prizes. So there is growing momentum behind AI assisted creation. Uh, but what I hope is that we use AI not to replace artists, but to like support them,
Mm.
right?
To maximize
Um,
it.
yeah, 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 yeah. I
Awesome.
think that's a good word to maximize. Yeah,
Like the potential. No, that's
yeah,
cool. Yeah, no,
productivity.
the productivity, right. Yeah,
Hmm.
no, yeah. I'm like, yeah, I'm very, I don't have an opinion on it.
Okay.
I'm not a specialist like you, but
Well, I
it
don't
does make
specialize
me,
in AI. So.
oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, but like, I mean, just as somebody, like, it doesn't, I agree, like, completely with you. It makes me wonder, like, um, how does Miyazaki feel? Or like a person that spent all this time
Mhm.
creating, this work of art, and now like the computer just maybe not banalizing is not the word, but maybe the person feels like they're banalizing my work of art or all this stuff that I do.
Uh,
But I agree with
mm,
you. In the sense of like it's here to stay, right? It's like it is what
yes,
it is.
yes.
It is what it is. Fortunately or unfortunately, however you
Mm,
stand on on the issue. But on a more or I mean, on a, I want to really end on like a high note.
yeah.
And and thank you again. It's been really a privilege. I know we've been communicating via email, but it's so great that we've been able to produce this work and share a little bit with our listeners about this really exciting art form, which is manga. And for you, just to explain a little bit, Artificial Hearts, it's a podcast that we created dedicating
Mhm.
the human to humanizing the hearts that have become cold through modernity by disseminating the works of Dostoevsky to a popular audience. In
Mm,
light of our discussion today, how do you believe, as a scholar of manga, as somebody who is very passionate about this art form,
mm,
how do you think that the experience of appreciating this work of art can help us become more human?
mm. Yeah, that's a really beautiful mission. And I share that, belief really, really deeply. Art, whether in the form of like manga or anime or literature, I think it invites us to confront the contradictions of being human. It allows us to inhabit perspectives that we might never otherwise encounter. So, for instance, like manga, like monster, or March comes in like a lion. They don't necessarily offer easy resolutions, right? They ask us to sit with questions of grief, ambiguity, moral uncertainty, financial insecurity, things like that. And even sometimes like suicide. So I think Dostoevsky does this too, to some extent, like manga. His works are deeply psychological, often exploring what it means to suffer, to believe, to doubt. And I think this capacity for reflection um, through the encounter with the other in fiction is part of how we stay human in an age of AI or acceleration or abstraction, if you will. And in the end, what I hope to do as a scholar is to help others read more deeply, to see that manga is not just escapism, but like a mirror. And sometimes it's in the mirror of a boy detective or like a idol singer like an Oshinoko or a magical girl like Sailor Moon, that we recognize something about ourselves that we hadn't noticed before, right? It has the potential to teach us new things.
Fantastic. Mimi, Professor Okabe, we want to thank you so much for being here on our
Thank you
platform.
for having me.
And for all of those of you who are watching, if you want to see some amazing content like we just had today, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. Bye bye. Pleasure meeting you, and thank you
Okay,
for being
yeah,
here with us.
take care.